So we've all heard of the phases of grief, denial, anger, all of these phases that I remember reading and thinking, it just doesn't really resonate with me. I seem to be bouncing all over the place. With my own grief journey, I really feel that there are actually 3 phases of grief that we slowly navigate. How long each lasts is different from person to person and depending on the circumstances that surround everything. But in my own experience, the first phase of grief I would label as drowning. I can recall in my own journey and my own story that when we first discovered that our son Baxter had passed away, I really felt a completely surreal feeling of disbelief. I felt like time warped. I felt confused and I found myself constantly saying, this isn't real, this isn't real. And over the next period of time, I really likened it to a feeling of drowning, like I was constantly underwater, looking up to the surface, wondering if I would ever breathe again or ever reach the surface. Now, this period of drowning, I call, is a really confusing and can be isolating time. I suffered a lot of brain fog, memory loss. I struggled with simple daily tasks. So if you're in this period of time at the moment, the period of time that I call drowning, the best thing you can do to navigate this is to seek the life rafts that help pull you through. And those life rafts are the little pieces of kindness that just appear at your doorstep from others, from friends or family that surround you. I recall having so many beautiful messages, cards, flowers, dinners that have just arrived at our door. And it's each of those little tiny pieces of kindness around you at this time that just serve as a little buoyant raft that just gets you through that next day or that next hour. So if you're in the phase of drowning, then looking for kindness and allowing yourself to simply be supported by the people who care for you at the moment. I remember distinctly a feeling of my own grief, a bit like a mirror reflection of a mountain in a lake. My own grief was matched by the kindness that surrounded us at that time. So there's nothing else you can do for yourself to navigate this initial phase of grief, but allowing yourself to be buoyed by the kindness of others is the best thing that you can do in this initial phase. I think after the drowning phase, when life starts to slowly resume and time starts to move forward again instead of standing still, this next phase I would call climbing a mountain or a steep sand dune. And I can only reflect on this because I live near the beach, and I recall many times during my pregnancy trying to climb up the sand dune to get off the beach, and I'd take one step and slide back and take another step and slide back, and it was a real effort to be able to climb that sand dune, and I really felt like I was putting in a lot of effort but actually not getting anywhere. So I really think that this next phase of grief is much like that. There are many emotions that are filled with this phase. You have emotions of perhaps resentment, perhaps despair, perhaps anger. And those emotions I felt for me were like a chain around my neck, and I was carrying them around all day, trying not to act on them but constantly feeling heavy, like my whole body was this heavy lead weight. At this phase I also felt in my own journey that I had the whole the size of the universe in my heart, where my son belonged, and it was missing. And nobody else could see that hole except for my husband and myself. And yet I had to carry this around invisible to everybody else. So it was in this phase, this kind of climbing the steep sand dune, or if you live in an area where there's lots of snow, a bit like climbing a snowdrift. I really felt like in this time that I was doing my best to help myself and to fix myself, to cure my grief. And I don't think those efforts were a bad thing to try, but they were very draining. And so the things that I tried were support groups, counselling, psychologists, running, vitamin B, diving in the ocean, yoga, meditation. I tried so many things. And it was really an effort to what I perceived to try and fix myself. And that fixing comes from knowing that you want to be a happy, appreciative, grateful person, knowing who you were perhaps or who you want to be, yet where you are is not where you want to be. And that distance from where you are to where you want to be is so great. It creates that kind of tension and anxiety within you. So if you're currently in this phase where you feel like every day you wake up with a heavy body and you're walking through mud, and you're doing your absolute best just to get by and not react to the emotions that kind of fill your body and weigh you down. If you feel like your loss is invisible to everybody else around you, if you're seeking all the help that you can to try and help yourself, whether it's psychologists or counsellors or different practices to try and help with your own self-care at this point, my highest recommendation when you're climbing that steep sand dune is to just make sure you get enough pause time, rest. So there are times where I felt like, okay, I'll just actually sit down on this dune for a bit and just try and gather my energy. Because it takes a lot of energy, this constant needing to try and fix. And if you can take little moments of rest pause in order to maybe appreciate how far you've come. I do recall a feeling when I was actually climbing a mountain years later after our son passed away, thinking that this journey is just never ending, and being quite despondent at looking at the top and thinking it's just so far away. And then I recall just sitting for a moment and looking out at the view and realising, actually, I've probably come a long way. You know, like a year ago I was in bed most of the time, and now I'm functioning. I'm actually able to participate in some things in daily life, and so that happens if you manage to pause and rest. So I'm not saying sit down forever. I'm just saying if you are in that climbing phase and you need to do that to try and build your courage and build your strength, that's okay. But struggling at it endlessly without rest time is more challenging. So taking time to pause and rest is really important in that phase. I think the final or the last phase of grief that I navigated through from the initial drowning phase to then kind of climbing the steep sand dune and feeling exhausted all the time, in actual fact, was what I call the black hole. And it does sound, it sounds like a really depressive journey, and in a way it is, but there is a saying that says that it's always darkest before the dawn. And that saying is actually quite true. I found in my own journey that feeling of sinking into blackness was almost like a feeling of surrender. Like, okay, grief, I give up. Take me over. That's okay, I can't fight you anymore. I really felt like during that climbing phase, I was fighting it. I was like, I just don't want to be here. I don't want to be feeling this. I don't want to be navigating this journey. This can't be real. This isn't us. And surely I can be better than this. I can be courageous and I can be strong and I can be all of these things that I want to be. But ultimately I discovered that I couldn't. And what I needed was simply to surrender. And during this phase, I found myself doing things like, when I felt a wave of emotion coming toward me, instead of fighting it and trying to be busy or trying to control it, I would simply lie down in the grass and light an incense and say to myself, by the time this incense has finished, this feeling will have passed, and just to sit with it for a little while and just allow it to pass. And do you know what? It actually does pass. So that kind of feeling of surrender into grief and just going, do you know what, I can't try anymore. You have to accept that this is where I am in my own journey. It can be scary. It can feel lonely. It can feel isolating. It can feel like maybe you'll sink forever and never come up. But you won't. Eventually you reach the bottom and you gather enough energy to push up. And I really feel that in this phase, if you're in this phase of like, oh, I'm giving up and I surrender to this, now is the time to ask good questions. And so the good questions are, how can I honour my loved one? How can I take my favourite piece of them into my heart and shine them out in a way that they continue to live on? And asking good questions during this phase where you are resting and you feel like you're in darkness, in actual fact, a little light will start to shine through. And it's worth knowing and remembering that Stars can't shine without darkness.